So for part two, I'm joined again by Gavin, who's the CEO of GoReport, and we're discussing in this episode, or this part of the episode, choosing a software supplier and how to get that right. So we've already covered in the first part what is digital transformation and then how to understand when's the right time and so on. I suppose if I kick off, I think there's a few key things that are worth considering when you're looking up a supplier, and you can correct me on this in a minute if you think I've gone, taken the wrong points, because you've probably covered both sides of this sort of customer and supplier side. But I think the key things that people may not always focus on is things like, cost is obviously something people look at when they're looking at a supplier. So how much am I going to have to spend to use that solution? And then when you're comparing two different suppliers or three different suppliers, it's easy to sometimes focus on the cheapest. Arguably, the problem there is the supplier not showing their value if you're going for cheapest, but really should be focusing on return on investment. What's that product actually going to deliver for you? So yes, you could spend less, arguably easier to get a return because you don't have to recoup as much, but the likelihood is it's not going to have the functionality and so on that you need for it to actually be of benefit. A higher priced one hopefully should offer more than a cheaper one. And then I think often something that you see as well is people buying for now. So I suppose scalability is what I'm touching on here, but often it's easy to focus on right now I need this level of functionality in order to be able to achieve what I want to do. And of course, if you then have future growth plans, whether that's going into other types of survey or scaling the number of people you service or team size, can the product work with you for that? If not, suddenly you're now having to look at a completely different digital transformation of like, how do I move supplier, which is another topic, I think. And then if you sort of, some of the big topics are around like we've discussed already, integration and interoperability is a word I can never say. But how do those products talk to each other? Because I think it's a nice idea to have one core product that does everything for you, but the reality is you're always going to have to use some specialist systems to power yourself. So like accounting software, if you look at Xero, Xero does loads of invoicing and the accounting side, but it doesn't process payments for you. Stripe goes and does that, but then Stripe doesn't do the accounting software. They each specialize, even though they're effectively in payment processing of different forms.
They
each specialize, so you have to then have those connections between the two. So I think there are a lot of factors like that, and then there's the less glamorous side, like security.
Less
does it
glamorous, but
matter?
incredibly important.
Yeah.
How well your data is looked after. I mean, I think on those, cost versus the ROI, scalability, both scalability in terms of can it evolve with my needs, and is it actually scalable if this product is successful and it has loads more customers? Does it still perform effectively, or does it grind to a halt because that business can't, the software vendor can't keep up with the success kind of thing? Integration, interoperability, all of those things. I think an answer to the question, is it important? How important is it when you choose your software vendor? The answer is it's incredibly important, but it's also not something that should scare you. And I think, that's for me, that's the key point. Really, is that the vast majority of people who are, in my experience, who I've engaged with, even on the very larger implementations where I've sat on either side of the fence, you may have people who've done it before, but the vast majority of people making this decision have not implemented software before and have not, this is not their day-to-day world evaluating software companies. And so if you look at all of our websites and all of our how we advertise ourselves, we'll cover all of those things like cost versus ROI, value, scalability, flexibility, why we're different kind of thing. But fundamentally, I think for the customer, when you choose a software supplier, it's about really understanding, are they going to help us meet the challenges that we've got, and how are they going to do that for us? And I think when you when you choose a software supplier, you should be thinking about, you want to deliver benefits and value consistently over a long time period. It's not a sell and be done. And a business should always have that as a consideration. But I think sometimes I see that that what that leads to is almost a paralysis of analysis where you just don't make a decision to move forward. And I've been there myself in choosing vendors, and particularly on larger scale ones where all you end up doing is denying the business the opportunity to resolve its challenges, and you're missing out on however many years of benefit you would have got had you made a decision. And I think what that really comes down to for anybody investing is how are you managing your risk. The last thing anyone wants is to be associated with an investment that doesn't return value. There used to be a phrase, no one ever got sacked for buying IBM, back in the sort of the mainframe computer days, where if you go with the industry leader, nobody could ever accuse you of making the wrong decision, kind of thing. Great for IBM, probably not great for innovation at that time on a wider basis. But I think to your what we've always talked about is what's the first thing somebody asks us is what's it going to cost me, what's it going to cost. And what we as vendors want to do is we will be open and transparent on every aspect of costing, but we need to understand what your challenge is in the first instance in order to say, are we right for you? There is that sort of all of our marketing and our messaging should have led you to the point that we are right for you, but we want to validate that on your first interaction. Are we the right type of business for you, to help you meet those challenges? So let's talk about that first quickly, and then get that on the table, and then talk about the value. What is it that you get from it? And then you overlay the full minutia of the detail of the costs. And that's how you get to an informed decision as quickly as is conceivably possible. And that's why you see a lot of software vendors will say, look, we don't want to give you the cost right away because we don't quite understand your problem. And you want us to understand your problem. Okay. You
Yeah,
want
yeah,
us to fully understand. You want us to be working really hard to make sure that you don't run the risk of failure. And that's difficult to come across in normal interactions and in normal interactions with salespeople. But that's what you should be striving for, really. Um, and in pure software terms about managing risk, I think given the nature of an industry where a lot of startups are common in software,
yeah, yeah,
and a lot of startups fail. There's no denying that, or they maybe fail, or they fail to exist in the form that they started. They may pivot to something else. They may be consumed by other businesses, or they may kick on and change their focus. Those are all risks that you have no control of when you invest in a product. And in my experience, it actually doesn't matter whether that product is relatively new or has been around for 15 or 20 years. I've seen,
yeah,
changes that are outside of your control. And that's really where you want to be thinking in terms of managing your risk. You want to be thinking about your exit strategy, at the
yeah.
very start. You should be
Oh,
thinking
absolutely.
about, what happens to my data if either one of these, either us or our vendor, are no longer interested in an ongoing relationship. How do we practically move forward with that? And that is one of the benefits. Both of us are annual subscription based services. We know that if we don't keep our customers happy, they don't come back next year and the year after and the year after. We're only interested in keeping people for the long term, and we have to prove it every year. But equally, if they decided to go somewhere else, it's not because they're locked in to us. It's it has to be a choice where they're making because we're delivering for them. And I think that in any digital transformation, you need to consider that. And that's why people talk about stickiness. You want stickiness to be, from a vendor perspective, you want stickiness to be because you're really delighting your customers. You don't want stickiness to be because it's too hard to move away, because that's generally not a great, in any walk of life, any walk of life or any part of personal life, it's not a great situation to be in. It doesn't feel particularly good. So I think all of those things that you say are very, very important, but it still comes back to, does have you got enough confidence that this vendor can help me um, meet my challenges? Does it deliver? A lot of systems will make claims about what they offer, but does it really add benefit, or just more process for you? Is the business progressive? Are they continuing to evolve? Are they interested in your sector that you work in? Are they working with lots of other people in that sector? Um, and particularly now with the way software has evolved into, do they play nice with the other vendors in your workflow? really. And that's the thing. We all have competitors, but if there are other software companies that are serving a different part of your workflow, like Survey Booker and GoReport, do
Yeah.
do they play nice? And not just say they play nice, but do they actually do those extra hard yards to really try and solve those problems for you, and then bring you a solution as a client? And those are the things that you need to think about.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with the point of you want to find a supplier who makes it easy for you to leave. There's
Yep.
ways of getting your data out and moving it elsewhere and in the right formats, um, but you don't want to leave because
Yeah.
they're performing, they're doing what they said, and for our mantra has always been to be progressive and to play nice. So what do I mean by that? Is exactly what you said. It's we're continually adding in more features based on what we think will be helpful, based on what we're being told will be helpful. Um, but we're also building an ecosystem that allows you to plug and play. So whether that's you know report writing, whether it's pushing stuff into accounting software, whether it's analytics, whatever it might be. Um, that is key. And if you end up with choosing a provider that's stagnant and isn't investing in the product, then you're going to be falling behind competitors that are using other
Yeah,
systems. So,
yeah. I mean, there's often a term used in business about sweating the asset. Effectively, you've
mm,
you've you've reached the end of your development cycle and just wanted to shift more units of it, effectively. And in software terms, that can never be the case for a business to be successful in the long term, because our underlying platforms change. The technology we all, that we base our platforms on, whether in our instance, the Apple environment, the Apple ecosystem, or any other environment, they move forward. And so you need to keep pace with those, and also overlay on top of that what value there is to a client. And I think, you know, as from a strategic leadership point of view in our business, with my leadership team, we spend an enormous amount of time talking to other people in the industry and talking to other vendors in the industry, both competitors and potential partners like yourself. And we don't do that for a chat. We do that to consider how can we make our clients' lives better. And I think I don't think people, from a user, I wouldn't expect them to understand how much work goes into that in order to get to a point where we actually have a viable solution that they would use. I think sometimes people think, well, can I not just do X or Y? But we've done the detailed work that says, but actually there's a step between X and Y that is not in either of our control, your control as a user, and therefore us producing a solution, it's not going to be something you're going to be able to use. So it's always about constantly trying to find those ways forward. And if you are with a vendor that either doesn't have the resources to do that, they're for other reasons, they're not focused on your sector, or they're not focused on that part of the business, then yes, that can become a problem. But if it's still meeting your challenges today, and you have an exit plan should you need to use it, then neither of those things should be a concern for you today in choosing the vendor effectively. You have to look at what today looks like. Does it meet my challenges today? Do I have a way out? Have I managed my risk? Do I know what the trigger points would be? In which case I can now go forward with a really, like I say, informed decision, but with also a plan, should it not go the way that we want in time. No, that's very different from an implementation failing. An implementation shouldn't fail, and that's, they can do for a variety of reasons, but um, you know that's a different set of challenges that shouldn't. No implementation should really fail.
I think they're all really good points. But there's a couple of other things I want to discuss actually around this on choosing a supplier in a second. But it sort of sparked a thought in my head, which is the other option, which is not choosing a supplier at all, i.e., self build.
Mm,
And I think that can sometimes be seen as a holy grail or an exciting proposition building your own thing. But as we full well know, and as you said, when you were reviewing those just integration aspects, it's very easy to look at software and go, "Oh, it just needs to do this." And there's so much more that goes on behind it than just press button and something happens. There's scenario planning and everything else. And I think sometimes, and I think more so in rare cases, it can be a good idea to go and build your own thing. I think the reality is it then takes you off from focusing on what you're trying to do, surveying, and now you're trying to spend a lot of time and effort and resource on building and testing and releasing, and then realizing it doesn't work and changing. And um, so I think on the whole, where you can choose a supplier, and then you can focus on
Yeah.
what you're wanting to do, not software.
Yeah, yeah. You have to remember what your day job is.
Yeah,
What are you paid for? A business is, ultimately, the luxury of even having a conversation like this is because someone's prepared to pay you for your value effectively, and whatever it is, the service or solution that you offer. I think the build your own debate is, I mean, obviously. I would say it probably happens to a lesser extent in the surveying industry, in my experience, than it does elsewhere. In that, I think that's maybe more of a reflection of the context and demographic. The surveying industry, or surveying as a profession, is, it lends itself to the small to medium sized enterprise style shape of business, with surveyors working in very large commercial environments. Surveying is a specialism service within a very large company, so it's still, in that context it happens less, but it does still happen, and we do still come across it. And my experience of other solutions is it happens an awful lot, and it's always anywhere where you have somebody who is of that mind, it's a question that needs to be asked or answered. And I think, there are many instances where internal or bespoke development resources are tremendously valuable to a business's competitive edge, and particularly where you have large businesses with multiple divisions and stakeholders, and around integrations and filling functional gaps. There's no doubt. I've experienced that. But to internally develop and deliver a scalable product that is secure, can evolve with your needs over many years, is a very costly venture and carries significant risk for a business. It's a much riskier proposition to build your own than it is what we were previously talking about, which is choosing a vendor that you then choose to move to another one. It's much riskier to build your own. I know I've led teams that have done it, both successfully and less successfully. So I know what the cost is, with that. But my first rule has always been, why would you redevelop something internally that already exists? Already exists, is proven, and is a fraction of the cost it would take to build it yourself. And I think, if you ask those questions first, the decision becomes very clear. And what you have to make sure, though, is that you don't mask things like internal development resource cost as not a cost to the project. It's a huge cost to the project. And you and I both know what it's taken to get our businesses to where we are, and what it's taken in terms of cost investment. And um, we know that's not something can be replicated. And why would you, if you could take that and build on it if you wished, or just take it and use it for its value? That's always been a puzzlement. It does happen, but much less so. I mean, when I started, in an engineering company, we had a development function within the business, because at that time, the only way to make various pieces of software work was to develop functional tools within your business. And that transformed in that particular business over my time there, where that that needed to be used less and less, because we were able to plug in tools that, from other vendors that could do it, and shift that expertise into people who do it every day, rather than as a distraction from our day job.
yeah, definitely. I think there's a couple of points you touched on. One just before this topic, and one just now, which is around, I suppose, sort of the risk and security aspect. Um, where I say you touched on it is on the startup aspect. So you could choose a startup, or you might even choose an established firm that just hasn't put a focus on it. But obviously, security is a huge risk in
Hmm.
the cyberspace day to day. Unfortunately, if you sign up to certain newsletters, you're constantly hearing about
Hmm.
another hack here and there. And
Yeah,
Ticketmaster recently, what, 500 million records of
yeah,
data lost. Um, so it happens to the best, but I suppose the risk is when you're choosing a supplier, you need to focus on, are they doing anything around security, or are they just focusing resource on marketing and some feature development?
yeah. I think, yeah, hugely important. I mean, we both have ISO 27001 certification for our for information security management, and I think going through that exercise is a tremendous eye opener for even ourselves who consider ourselves experienced practitioners. And it doesn't mean that um, what it really means is that you're doing everything within your power to prevent something happening, but you're also putting in place a mechanism where your rapid response to situations arising. That's from a protect your own business point of view, but very, very important for us to protect our client data effectively that we hold. And I think that when you've been through those sorts of exercises and you've invested in that, it kind of maybe draws your eye a little bit to other people who claim to do it, but are you know um, focused in other areas of growing their business. Now, the first thing is every business has to start somewhere. So you and I both know some great solutions that are coming through, even in the surveying profession, doing slightly different things than what we're doing, that we consider as part of our ecosystem, and they're doing great stuff. And although they haven't invested the time in their certification processes and whatnot, they are very experienced, or they are utilizing extremely experienced resource from elsewhere to support them on that journey. Um, but that comes with a higher risk than working with a company that's more established. I think you know the the focus of your business, um, you have to consider all aspects, even the unglamorous stuff that people take for granted. There should be, somebody buying us should take for granted that we look after their data, but they should also ask how. How can you demonstrate that you do? You don't have to understand every single process that we have, but you should ask us the question. What do we do to make sure that their data is protected, and that we're doing everything that we can, and we're also helping them and advise them. So, those things take investment. They take consideration at all aspects of development. So security is baked in to everything we develop. And again, we utilize experts in the field. We practice what we preach. We don't try and do that all internally. We bring in people who are experts in this, who do it every day, and they challenge our guys to be better, and to do better.
Yeah, it's definitely, I agree. It's an eye-opening experience as you go through it. You learn a lot as a company, and but it puts you in a much stronger position to deal with things better. I think I suppose as part of that is we've touched on ISO 27001, so that's a type of accreditation to look for. It's a good one, I'd argue. It's not self-certified. You have to go through
Mhm.
external audits with various different people throughout the year. So um, yeah, you are marked on your homework, not self marking. Um, but there are other accreditations which potentially aren't as strong. So it's like understanding what they mean rather than, well, I'm not saying
Yeah.
they're good or bad, but Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus have very different levels of
Mhm. Mhm.
what's reviewed, and
Mhm.
it's ISO 27001 and so on. So yeah, they're all good things to look for, but just understanding what they actually have behind them,
Yeah, and
I think.
look, I would recommend that any, having been through the process, from instigation and utilizing, the expertise that we brought in. One of the things, um, I'm a engineer by background. Quality management, quality control, risk management, all of those things are sort of baked into your engineering profession effectively. And I've been around the times where going into businesses where, um, quality was deemed as almost like a desktop document exercise. Follow the quality process, etc. And it was one of my first jobs, was to better align the quality process with what people actually did in a business, which were often not the same thing. And so I think one of the big learning points for me is sort of an advocacy for, making sure everybody pushes for their vendors to be certified, is that you know it's been a tremendously valuable experience for us as a business, because it is baked into the way we do work. It's not something that's done to report on our work. It is very much a consideration at each point of how we do our work, and therefore it's much more aligned. And whenever it's not aligned, it's very easy to see where it's not, and to adjust accordingly. One of the main things is a no blame culture in our business, and we've seen that, our clients have fallen foul of sort of phishing exercises in their own environments. And so we'll, as soon as we're aware of it by something coming to us, we're immediately, on to them to say, look, I think this could be a problem for you, and in our experience, this is a good next step action kind of thing. Um, and in that way, we can, at the end of the day, the whole point of our activity here is to avoid disruption of the service, and to make sure that your data is protected. And those things take effort, they take investment, they take costs, and it's not often something that is afforded to very small startup style businesses. But
No, no.
should be a consideration in everything you do.
Definitely. There's one last point I've got, and then I'll see if there's anything I've missed. But I think in terms of finding potential vendors in the surveying industry, there are resources out there like the RICS Tech Partner Scheme that you can have a look at, and I think it's a good place to start in terms of seeing what might be available to you to look at. I think that just the only thing to be aware of. I think there are sort of sometimes misconceptions that partners on there have been vetted in some way, but it's more, as Ricks have say themselves, it's a directory to be able to look up as a starting point and see what's available to you. But from there, you do need to then go and look at what are those different points we've covered around interoperability or certain standards or security, etc.
Yeah,
Before
yeah,
making a decision.
yeah. I mean, I think
Yeah.
the obviously, if you in any walk of I was investing in a spin bike recently, as part of a recovery from a knee operation. And when you go and you look for something that's not necessarily readily available on the high street kind of thing, and you have to think about something that you're investing in, and there are no shortage of reviews of top 10 bikes of 2024, top 10 bikes of 2023, whatever. And there must be you know 25, 30 that I found on the first hit of everybody telling, and very few of the bikes actually matched from one vendor to the next. So when you're searching for something, you have to be careful to ensure that your source is actually a validated thing. And obviously, the Rick's Tech Partner Pro is not a validated I think it is a directory listing, which is good from the perspective of here are all of the people that are in the industry, but not so in terms of ranking you as to what you do. So I think how do we look at that? Well, we obviously we want to make sure that we make ourselves available to the profession, through being a face to face at conferences and events and sponsoring and those sorts of things. We want to make sure that the referral network is strong. I would always encourage um, anybody coming to us to ask people who already use our software, and also ask people who use other pieces of software, or use who've chosen not to use us, because I think you have to make your own decision when you're choosing a vendor, and you should have balanced opinion. That's what an informed decision is all about. And also ask our guys if what are the other options. Now, some might say, well, we don't have any natural competitors. I think that's a standard phrase that every software vendor has, but the reality is there are. We think we do things differently, and we shouldn't be shy of saying other people do it, and you might want to have a look at them. But here's how we do it. Our job is not to comment on them. Our job is to tell you, how we do it and why we think that's good to meet the challenge you've expressed to us. Um, but I think in terms of the sources, you should do that. You should look at our case studies. You should look at other people's case studies. You should challenge your vendor to say, look, why why how do you find the vendor in the first place? Well, that's down to our marketing and lead generation, and how much we put our name out there, and hopefully we appear at the top of the list, or near the top of the list of a lot of things when you're looking to solve your problem. But yeah, fundamentally, I think your journey starts with asking the question in the first instance, and you're going to ask a lot of questions, and our job is to be well prepared for the questions that you ask.
Definitely. I think we've covered quite a lot there in terms of things to consider, from finding the right person to how do you leave. Is there anything we've missed on that topic, do you think?
Um, I think I think it is important to talk about ownership of a
Yeah,
business. I think in terms of it is back in the day, you would have your main source of information of a business would have been the sales rep coming to visit you, dropping brochures off, that kind of thing. Obviously, there's there's a lot of research you can do on your own, and I would always advocate that you consider ownership as part of that, and that's particularly in my experience from the software industry, because I think it's important in two ways. The first way is you should consider who owns the software you use in terms of your data. That's particularly relevant, I think, in terms of whether the owner might be a competing or conflicting organization to your operations. And indeed, if I think a big part of that is if the software is a primary focus of the owning business or a sideline to the business, because I think that gives you, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying it's another data point that you should be considering in terms of whether a vendor is a long-term solution for you. And where do you start with that? The privacy policy on a website is always a good place to start on that, and to just do a quick search, a quick company's house search, just to understand what sits behind that flashy website that's in front of you. And I think, by the way, that's valid in any purchase you make anywhere, really, is important. And with regards to wider ownership, it is a unique thing, maybe not a unique thing, but certainly it feels very prevalent in the software industry, where many companies will change shareholding over their lifetime. GoReport included. That's happened 3, 4, 5 times in GoReport's lifetime, without any matter of difference to our customers at all. Now, it may or may not be important, depending on whether it does affect the core strategy of the business and its ability to evolve. I've experienced that where, working for 4 or 5 years with the business was perfect. They changed ownership and changed focus, and therefore, um, the relationship wasn't the same over time, and that's where your exit plan comes in. A controlled, managed transition from one vendor to another is important. We've GoReport have been providing solutions for 13 years at this point, and there have been many, many great people that have contributed to that journey over time that aren't in the business today. They've come and gone, often without overlapping with each other. But what remains constant is the company mission and the focus on serving our clients, and the focus on our solution. I'm obviously here, on this podcast, as a face and voice of GoReport, but my team are all on board with the same desire to serve our customers that I have as a CEO. And as a CEO, I'm probably the least important person to our customers. It's the focus of who they deal with every day, the product and solution we provide, the resources we have to support them is the most important, regardless of whether I was the CEO or anybody else was, or regardless of who, theoretically owns our company, or who owns our company or doesn't. To a vendor choosing, none of that, it's a point of interest to them, but as long as we're delivering, that's the most important thing. But the ownership, like I said, the ownership from a who owns, from their focus point of view, should always be a consideration.
Yeah, it's a very good point. It ties back actually to the first point we made, I think, where around, is it progressive? Does it deliver? And, what it's doing right now and where it's going to be will be affected by
Yeah,
stuff like that. Yeah, and
it's
also
it's
obviously, yeah,
interesting.
data considerations always. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I've been at GoReport for 5 years now, coming up in 5 years. And obviously, we talked about before the industry conversations that we have and who's around and whatnot. There have actually been three businesses that ostensibly provided the same solution as us, that existed when I came into GoReport, that don't exist at all anymore.
Mm,
And I think you that can create a fear that's much bigger than the reality for our clients choosing a solution. Like I said, you don't it's not about whether that is a risk, because it's always going to be a potential risk. It's about how you manage that risk and how confident you are that it's not going to be a problem for you.
yeah.
And that's where we put the time and effort, and our vendors give us their challenges, so that we can openly talk about it, just so that they understand what we are and what we're about, kind of thing.
Awesome. I think that covers it all nicely. There's obviously a lot to consider in terms of choosing the right person, or the right company, I should say. But I think that gives a nice framework in terms of something to work from. So yeah, join us for part 3, and we're going to be looking at how to achieve a successful transformation process. So we've covered what's digital transformation, how to choose someone, but then how to make it successful coming next.